Good evening. How's everybody?
Doing great.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad everybody's just excited to be here as I am. Oh, boy. So, Caroline is joining us tonight. Welcome, Caroline.
Thank you.
She's in the Wednesday night group. She's going to hang out with us tonight. These are all the stars on the screen: Randy and Josh and Liz and Brandon, Kentina, Quintina. They're all stars. So you're with the right group. Caroline's a star in the other group. So
All right.
I'll go ahead and jump right in. I'll share my screen and we'll get started. All right, we are at, where are we? We're on week 6, technology, cyber media, social media, cyber issues. And we're going to look at that the second half tonight. We'll get to that content. And so tonight we'll also look at the skip and we'll look at case study 2, which will be, as you can see, due next week. So I will lead us off, as I always do, with the things that I saw this week that caught my eye. So for discussion board 5, Amy made a good point. Obviously, we have to have documentation. In due process, we have to have a referral or documentation from a teacher. But it would also be good if we required our teachers to document their parent contacts as well. Now, I hear this from time to time. Administrators say, first time, when a kid comes to my office, you better have made a parent contact. Well, that can't always be true. Well, they just get in a fight. It's a one-off. But if it's a pattern of what we call generally disruptive behavior, and that's a state code, by the way, if it's a pattern of generally disruptive behavior, then there should be evidence of parent contact. So it's not a bad idea to have your teachers keep a log. And the way to do that is their email. It's pretty simple now, but that's a good idea. Tremaine made a good point, and I always remind everybody, call your SRO before you do a search of a kid. What if you find something on him that's contraband? What are you going to do with it now? If you take it into your possession, you now are in possession of it.
Mm-hmm.
Before you search a kid, bring the SRO in. Now you can do the search and they can witness, but remember the standard is different for school administration desiring to do a search than police. You just have to have reasonable suspicion. Some kid whispered in your ear. They have to have probable cause, very different standards. So you still need to do the search, but they need to be present. So if you catch something or, you take something off of a kid that they shouldn't have, you can just turn it over to the officer and they may want to pursue legal charges if it's a weapon. So always make sure that you got your SRO there when you do a search. Don't ever do a search without an SRO present. Carolina and Amy talked about cyberbullying this week. One of the things is you got to be careful, and we'll talk about this later, is not to define cyberbullying too narrowly. I hear this all the time. Well, I don't know if it happened at school. That's not one of the standards of cyberbullying. Or they didn't use a school device. Again, not a standard of cyberbullying. Location or device is immaterial. If it disrupts the educational environment, then you have to deal with it. So you can't be looking for ways not to deal with it. And that's the notion here, is don't define it too narrow. Caroline did an excellent job in her HR on hiring, of finding the right person in HR to talk to, and the protocol that you go through. Now, the due process for hiring, HR, everything's about due process and law. Every topic we talk about due process. There is a due process protocol in hiring a new employee. The difference is every district, who's responsible to initiate and follow through on all of those steps is different in every district. You need to find out in your district what that protocol is. You've got your due process, the substance of it, what we got to do, but the procedure is different everywhere in terms of who does it. I'll give you an example. I worked most immediately, I worked in 4 school districts in my time in the business. I worked in 2 back-to-back, a low wealth and a high wealth district. When I was principal in a low wealth district, I had to do everything myself. When I mean everything. I had to advertise, I had to go through the resumes, I had to call references, I had to walk them through every step. But that was a district where when the cafeteria lady was out, you put on a hairnet and served lunch. I mean, it was a very, very small district. It wasn't very small, but it had a small number of employees. I left there and went to Charlotte, High Wealth District, where all I had to do was pick up the phone and call my analyst and say, send me 3 people for this position. And they'd already vetted them. They'd already done references, background check, drug test. They'd already done everything. All I had to do was just point, I want this one. That was it. Now, somewhere in between that is where you'll be. You'll be in a low wealth district where you got to do everything. Take them to get their drug test, follow up to make sure they got it, initiate the background check. To Charlotte Mecklenburg, where you don't do any of it. But you got to know what your district protocol is. You need to talk with your principal and somebody in HR. Caroline did a good job of that. Tommy talked about cyberbullying as well, and make sure you involve law enforcement and all the parties, and make sure, again, just like with all discipline situations, that you're working for restorative justice rather than just trying to figure out how to punish somebody. I like Josh. He talked with his administrator. I love that he's talking with them, and they said they're going to let Josh learn something about and go into that module and see it. That's great. If you can get a look at it, they'll let you train on it and do some of that. That's wonderful. That's what you want to do. Power School Discipline module is very involved, as I showed you in the manual last week. It's not something that's intuitive. You're not just going to pick it up because you're smart. You need to see what it is in its totality. And good job, Josh, talking with his administrator. They're going to let him do that. That's wonderful. And Josh also mentioned, consistency with multiple processors of discipline. Again, you can run reports out of Power School to make sure that you're being consistent. I do it every Friday. Tremaine talked about collaborating with peers, asking people. That's a good idea. Again, if you don't know, ask somebody. Caroline talked about her assessment inventory. And one of the things that I want to make you aware of on assessment inventories, you got to do it twice a month. But if you document things that are not as they're supposed to be at your school, and you don't do anything to follow through with that documentation, they'll get you for nonfeasance when the negligence lawsuit comes. If you just every 2 weeks put on a report, a door handle's broken over here, and just file that report away, and then somebody comes in, like in Uvalde, finds the classroom with the broken doorknob and goes in and kills all the kids, that will not go well for you. But so the notion here, not just you do the inventory and you document, you need to follow up with the people and responsible for those things. And I'd do it by email, so I had a record of it. I'd be emailing the maintenance man saying, this door's broken. This needs to be fixed. This is a liability issue. It's a safety concern. And if they want to ignore it, that's their peril. But you cannot just say, well, yeah, here's the 10 things bad on my assessment inventory, put it on a piece of paper and file it in the filing cabinet, send a copy to the superintendent's office. You need to follow up with the people responsible for those things. If your fire extinguishers are out of compliance, if they've expired, then you need to call the fire extinguisher man. And that's what we're talking about. Emmy pointed out it takes time to do due process. It does. Whether it's discipline, whether it's EC, whether it's hiring, it takes time. It really takes time. Liz made a great point on due process for discipline is different for EC kids than regular ed kids. There's extra steps. You got to know that. And again, third time they do the same thing, you got to go to that paperwork, do that manifestation termination, because they're showing a pattern. See if it's, related to their disability. You can't just wait. Well, I've got 10 days. I can put them out of their normal placement for up to 10 days, whether in school, out of school, or whatever. No, third time around, they go to the front of the line, folks. Due process is different for EC than it is Reg Ed. Jasmine, one of the points that I wanted to make is the difference between interpretation and discretion. too many times I've had folks not do the right thing because I was using my discretion. You have no discretion. You follow the law. Now, interpretation, how you interpret the law. Don't define things or interpret them too narrowly. What would a reasonable person say? Circles back to cyberbullying. If you define it too narrowly and say, well, that's not my problem, and then something jumps off at your school and they say, well, he was aware or she was aware that that was going to happen because they knew, and you say, well, I interpreted that not to be cyberbullying. Well, you got to be careful. Don't use discretion, follow the law. And when you're doing interpretation, don't define things too narrowly. Adam made a good point. And this is one of the things that's hardest for teachers to understand. And just because they don't agree with it doesn't mean that you don't do it. The law is very clear. When a teacher sends you a referral, that's the end of their part of the process. Do not, I'm going to say it again, do not allow teachers to make recommendations for punishment. That is not part of due process. It actually violates due process because that's judge and jury, isn't it? That's one of the things that due process is supposed to stop is you can't have the same person that sends the referral metering out the punishment. That's actually now prohibited by federal law in cases of sexual. The person that does the investigation can't even be the one that gives out the punishment. But the one that makes the referral cannot be the one that determines or recommend punishment. Do not allow teachers to do that, and tell them, when you turn this over to me, I'll handle it. But do not make a recommendation. Don't send me an email. Don't run me down in the hall. That violates due process, folks. And if people overhear that and find out that teachers are doing that, you will be sued and you will lose. That violates due process. Teachers do not make recommendations as to what consequences will be. They simply, turn in the referral as detailed as possible, any witness statements, and then administratively, you have to be objective when you handle it. Teachers, by virtue of being the one who sent the referral, cannot be objective according to the law. That's not a debatable one. That's not a discretion, or that's not Dale's opinion. Teachers can't be a part of the consequences, period. The person that writes the referral cannot be. That violates substantive due process. Make sure that teachers understand that. LaShonda pointed out the need for any disciplinary system, whether it's PBIS or discipline with dignity, doesn't matter, is training for consistency between different classrooms and teachers. That's very important. What you don't want is a kid does one thing in one room and it's ignored in the other, he gets suspended. That won't work well. Again, that'll get you on due process. On that, but what it will get you on is arbitrary. That's the standard of arbitrary and capricious. That standard of arbitrary, that everybody's got to be pretty much the same. The way you do that is training and follow through. Glenda talked about how her AP and SRO work together. That's an excellent example of how procedural due process is supposed to work. Again, if law enforcement's involved, that's part of due process. You're supposed to work with them. If it says, report to law enforcement, that's what that means. This one, Brandon brought this one up, and this goes for, do not allow teachers to send kids out of the room unescorted, period. He pointed out that at his school, teachers sometimes will send kids out to go to the EC teacher's room. They're not on the head count. They can't be in that room. That violates federal law. Do not allow reg ed teachers to send kids to the EC teacher's room. That's a federal law violation, but don't allow them to send them out, period. Kristen pointed out that MTSS works, and it does. That's why we're doing it, and that's why it's now state law. If you want to read an excellent, very summarized but excellent MTSS review, what the different tiers and how they work, Randy did a really good job of that. Shout out to Randy. I also like that Randy reached out to his HR and and went through hiring with them and stressed the importance of getting references. And I love that he included the HR flow chart. I like that the district put one together so everybody would know what the steps were, but who was responsible for each step. So shout out to Randy for including that. So if you want to read a good one on HR hiring, our discussion board, Randy did an excellent job on that one too. Good job, Randy. Tanya did an excellent job on cyberbullying. And that particular one, the kid used the school system's Chromebook. But again, we got to get away from the notion of basing enforcement on location or device. Doesn't matter what they use. And Tanya did a good job of detailing an IEP meeting. And the thing to remember on IEP meetings is I know that the EC staff did that paperwork and did all that stuff and worked so hard and the parent didn't do anything. But in the end, IEP meetings are collaborative. Parents have to agree, regardless of who did the paperwork. So those are the things that caught my eye this week. Excellent job on those. So the first thing I'll cover tonight is our case study for next week, case study 2. So let me pull that up. Oh, I know where I'm going. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, so when you read your case study here, this is letter to the community. Superintendent wants to do a system called student-based budgeting. He piloted it last year at 4 schools, and now he wants to do it district-wide. And so it sounds like a good idea where you would get more money, more resources to schools that have more at-risk kids, harder kids, more expensive kids to educate. Sounds like it's a very good idea. It's ethically sound. However, it's illegal. Why is it illegal? Well, because back in the early 90s, there were some low wealth districts. This is a national case, the Leandro case. There were some low wealth districts in North Carolina, and you need to research the Leandro case. Leandro versus North Carolina, Leandro. And we'll show you that just in a minute. But anyway, 5 low wealth districts got together and said the funding formula for North Carolina is not equitable. So here was the issue. The state at that time was sending $7,000 per pupil per year to the districts in North Carolina to educate children. $7,000. Because in 1966, North Carolina got out of capital funding, the state, and put the burden on the local school district, LEA as they're called, local education agency, to not only fund the building of buildings, but also the upkeep of buildings. Low wealth districts, they were strapped trying to keep up. They don't have a lot of business. What funds the county commissioners is the tax base on property tax and business tax. Well, what if you're in a rural area that doesn't have a lot of businesses, and what if the houses aren't worth a lot? Then you don't have a lot of money. So the low wealth district said, we can't even hardly fund our buildings, much less add anything extra to the actual education of pupils. So we're only spending $7,000, as opposed to Charlotte-Mecklenburg, who's taxing its residents so highly, and they have so much business there, and property taxes, properties are worth so much more. They're not only funding their own buildings and keeping them up, but they have an additional $4,000 per pupil to spend on the education of children. So low wealth districts were spending 7, high wealth districts were spending 11. There was a $4,000 gap in what they were spending to educate a child. And they said, this is not equitable. The state needs to address this flat grant funding where every child gets $7,000. Now, as we know, they don't get the $7,000 up front and all at one time. They get 700 10 times minus attendance. But they said there's a discrepancy. Although we start at 7 each, it doesn't end up at 7. It ends up a $4,000 gap. So they sued the state of North Carolina and said, we want district power equalizing or a student-based budgeting or something other than flat grant. Flat grant, kid gets this much money, period. We want something different. What they actually wanted was district power equalizing with a recapture provision. When you're in a doctoral program, I'll teach you that. And so the case was heard in 1993 and was decided 30 years ago in 1994. Again, this is a national case. Now, what I need for you to understand is who won and who lost and why. Students get this wrong every time. So let me go to this document. So here is Duke Law. They have summarized it for you. So I want to be very clear. The Leandro plaintiffs, the low wealth people, lost. Let me say that again. The low wealth people lost. Now, don't be fooled by this notion that we're going to give you a little extra money, we're going to start a lottery and all that. That was a fool's errand. Judge Manning and then Judge Lee retired, and then got the new one. Last year, Judge Lee said that North Carolina was over $1 billion behind in giving this extra money that they said they'd give as a result of the lottery. And ain't no money left over from the lottery for schools. Lottery is just a hoax. It's just regressive tax on poor people. And so you got to understand the Leandro, the low wealth people lost. We still have flat grant funding in North and South Carolina, which is per pupil. Whether you're in a rich district or a poor, doesn't matter. You get the same. Now, getting back to our case study. Now, what the superintendent did, he has they have discretionary money up to a certain amount that they can use, and they can run a little pilot. But now what he wants to do as a district, is that legal? No. Why? Let's see what the court said. A unanimous court stated that neither school districts nor counties have any constitutional right to equal funding at the end. We started equal, and but they have no constitutional right for it to end equal. Superintendent's plan is not looking so good now. The court went on to rule that residing in North Carolina have a fundamental state constitution to receive a sound basic education, yes, but the state determines how much that is in per pupil and sends it. Now, if you want to add to that, fine. If you don't, fine, but you have no right to more than whatever the state sends you. You don't have a right to equal funding if you're in Hope County equal to Mecklenburg County. You don't have that right. And they said, not local school districts, the state of North Carolina has the ultimate constitutional obligation to deliver that basic education, no exception, no excuses. So what that means is, not only will the state not adjust the money up or down so that everybody ends with the same, local district can't do it either. Although the superintendent, while good heart, sounds like a good plan, the court found that the state has no obligation to make sure the money's even at the end after you add local money, but that the local couldn't do it either. Neither the county nor the district can. So what it means is the money follows the kid. You can't take some of the money that's supposed to be for this kid and give it to for the school for this kid over here, even though they might be more difficult to educate, might be further behind or what. No, you cannot do that. The superintendent's plan is illegal. So let's follow the money for just a minute here. Can you be, Liz knows this. Liz, can you take money from the EC kids and give it to some other kids in the building? So you can't move federal money. So what money is he going to move? Well, what about state money? You just saw the state money. You can't move. They said you can't move state money. All right. So then I get people who, the smart guy in the back says, well, what about local money? Are school boards empowered in North or South Carolina? Can they tax? No. Who do you have to go to get your money? When the school board develops its budget every spring, can they fund it? No. How do they get their budget funded? They have to go to who?
County commissioners.
County commissioners. And you have to fill that budget out completely, right? So once that budget is set by the county commissioners, can you change that? No, you can't just move it around willy-nilly. Now you say, well, we'll get the county commissioners. We'll come up with a budget where we give different. Now the county commissioners know the rules too. They know that they'll be open to a lawsuit on the interpretation of this. And there's been a few over the years, and they know they'll lose. You can't move that money around. It has to follow the child. Even the county commissioners cannot move that money as elected officials. They are required to go through a course at the Institute of Government and learn how to deal with money most specifically. And one of the first things they're told is you can't move money around. You can't give more to one than the other. The law says that. Can't move local money. You can't move state money. Can't move federal money. So how's he going to do this? Well, he did a little pilot program because he had some discretionary money. Now, the problem you get into that is and we'll dive into this more. As the superintendent and CFO in Chapel Hill Carborough found out, you got to be careful with that. So in Chapel Hill Carborough, it's a tale of two cities, literally. Chapel Hill side is wealthy, white, and affluent. Carborough side is not. So what the superintendent there was going to do, now this is a recent case happened during COVID. This is not a million years ago back in my era. This is this decade. And I've got a link to that in our shell. So what she did, she had up to $90,000 in discretionary money in that district. Sounds like a lot, but big as their budget is, not a lot of money. Had $90,000 discretionary money. So what she did, she knew she couldn't hire anybody and couldn't, do the things that she could do. So what she did was she contracted a consulting company, and they brought in teachers. And it was over $1 million, but she was doing it in payments of $89,999. So, but now the deal was, number one, that $90,000 is one time. You can't do that every year or every 6 months. That's a one-time deal. And she obligated, I think it was 11 or 12 payments of that, $90,000. So that's the first thing. So showed intent to violate the law there. So what happened when it came to light? Because there was a retired principal in Chapel Hill who had a grandchild in Chapel Hill schools and knew the law and knew Leandro and filed a grievance against him, a lawsuit. And of course, they fired the CFO immediately. They let the superintendent go out on medical leave for a week or two and then terminated her. This happened in Chapel Hill, Carborough recently. So the notion here is this superintendent, against better judgment, did a little pilot program. Shouldn't have done that, because the entire intent of the pilot program was to subvert the law. But it can't be spread. I mean, he should have been told no. The school board should have said no to begin with, that this is not going to end well. There's nowhere for this to go to. We can't do this. And even, I suspect, and this is just supposition on my part, even if it wasn't illegal to move the local money around, I suspect with the district races that county commissioners are in now, how would you like to go to the constituents in your district as a county commissioner and say, I went along with taking money from our schools and giving it to the schools across town? How do you think that would go for county commissioner candidates at re-election time? That would be the end of their political career. So it's not only illegal, it's just not practical that you would do that. That the superintendent did this is really an issue. Shouldn't have done it to start with, but definitely cannot continue it. So the things to remember: North and South Carolina, flat grant funding. Money must follow the kid. Leandro, Can't move state money, can't move federal money, can't move local money. Money must follow the kid. Every kid gets a sound basic education, and that money they send is supposed to pay for that. So the outcome of that is if I take half of Randy's money and give to Emmy, then Randy's not getting a sound basic education, because even $1 less than what the state sends would be considered less than a sound basic education. Now, locally, you could make more money and start some initiatives locally to add some more money. We did that in Charlotte, and we raised $3 million additional outside of the budget, local money for the high school challenge, because Judge Manning said what we had going on in high schools was akin to genocide. His words, not mine. Problem with that is it became such a political nightmare. The Gang of Five, one political party, all ran as a group and ousted the current group of county commissioners and got it stopped immediately. It was just such a political nightmare, but they were going to use extra money in the local budget and went through the commissioners. And so it got approved that one time because they had some money that came from sales tax, a one-time deal, and they were going to do that. And so, but it was such a political nightmare. Now, here's the thing that you got to remember. $3 million is a lot of money to me and you, but at that time it was less than 0.1% of the annual budget in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. At that time, the budget was $1.4 billion with a B. $3 million is nothing, but it was such a political nightmare. So the point is don't head down that road. Don't get involved with that. You say, well, Dale, we're not superintendents, but we take that to understand where the law comes from. So as a school principal, we have to establish provenance here. As a school principal, you can't be moving monies from one budget line to another. You can't be saying, well, but it's the right thing to do. That's immaterial. The notion here is that the legal thing to do. You can't combine money streams. You can't take one and put it with another. Even the money that you raise locally from selling fruitcakes or pencils, you have to tell the district what you're going to do with it, and they have to prove it up front, and it better be spent on that. You can't cross funding streams is the whole notion here. Superintendent can't do it. You can't do it as a principal. If money comes for you for this child, for this reason, for this program, it better go to that, period. Don't be thinking you're hurting the team here. Well, I thought it would be better used over here. I use my discretion. You don't have any discretion. Every dollar you got is earmarked for what it has to be spent on, period. Don't be thinking. Never good when you start thinking. Never good. This notion of thinking outside the box, that's my most hated phrase in the world, is thinking outside the box. What that means is we're going to cheat or not follow the rules, or we're going to do something illegal. No, we think we color inside the lines. We stay in the box, because if we don't, not only will we lose our house, we may lose our freedom if the money gets gone, if we misspend the money. Trust me, the state wants it back. The feds want it back. You've got to understand that you can't move money between streams or sources. There's 4 sources: federal, state, local, and your local school money that you've raised yourself. That you cannot be shuffling that stuff around, combining it, doing any of that stuff. Your superintendent can't even do it. Your county commissioners can't even do it. Your school board can't do it, folks. You've got to understand how serious the laws are behind how money has to be treated. So case study 2, I want you to dig into Leandro. Again, I've given you the notion here. I've told you the answer is the Leandro plaintiffs lost. They did not win. Now you say, but they said they're going to give them some capital money, pork barrel from the lottery, hardly any of it. None of it ever gets there. And what has come has been wasted. They built the NASCAR Institute in Ireland County, no value. They built a lunchroom up in Stokes County. So they couldn't figure out how to do 2 lunch shifts at the high school. Wasn't smart enough to schedule 2 lunch shifts in the master schedule. So they built them a cafeteria, and then they closed the school because they didn't have enough kids to run it. It's just been wasted. What little money has come from the lottery into capital projects, that's just been wasted North and South Carolina. None of it goes to buying more teachers or, actually educating kids. It's just a regressive tax. I mean, they have to pay that nitwit that does that commercial Tuesday on where they advertise the lottery all the time. If you're from North Carolina, you've seen that idiot wears a sign. All his commercials, they pay for advertising. They have to pay the winners. They have to pay the company. What is it? By the time they get through paying everybody, you know how much money is left over out of the lottery? 7%. That's all that's actual. That the lottery yields 7 cents on a dollar spent on in the lottery. 7 cents. And most of it goes to opportunity grants or scholarships. They've been subverting it to vouchers for private schools. It has made zero educational impact in North Carolina over the last 30 years. Zero. So no, we didn't get anything out of Leandro. They were supposed to give all this stuff, separate money set aside. Judge Lee, before he retired last year, said the state of North Carolina is over $1 billion behind. And the General Assembly says, you can't make us nanny, nanny, boo, boo. We're not giving you anything. And until you can make them, I mean, even what Leandro said that they would get in terms of capital money for building, it never came anyway. The important part is because they didn't change the funding formula from a flat grant, nothing happened other than we got a lottery, which, as you know, is just a regressive tax on poor people. So that's the notion of the case study is it makes you learn the legal provenance of how money has to be handled. That's why we have it. And it goes at the very top level and comes down. All right, questions about the Leandro case. All right, it is a watershed case in America, not North Carolina. This is watershed case for the United States on money. Now, a lot of school districts are going to student-based budgeting. I think but a lot of them are moving away. Again, it's mostly a political party issue. 10 years ago, there were 36 states that did some form of student-based budgeting where they adjusted the money. There's only 26 now. As more and more county commissioners, state level races go more and more one political party, red, Republican, we move away from the equity issues, trying to make things more equitable, for good or for bad, according to which party you're in. All right, so now let's talk about the skip. All right, the skip is really easy. It's quick. But here are the places where people make their mistakes. I can close that. Close that. All right. The candidate will lead the skip team and conduct a needs assessment, determine the gaps in communication between internal and external communities. All right, there's where the first mistake comes. When you say needs assessment, so here's the prompt. The candidate will lead the skip team and needs to determine gaps in communication between the internal and external communities and potential opportunities for involvement of these communities in decisions that have a direct effect on community and the schools. The needs assessment should include background description of the setting. You've already written that. A clear statement of the purpose of the needs assessment. All right, that's where everybody goes off the rails. This has nothing to do with academics. Let me say that again. This has nothing to do with academics. We're not doing the needs assessment's real clear. We're determining gaps in communication between the school and parents, period. And that's what you should say in terms of the purpose of the needs assessment. We're not trying to gaps in communication, folks. That's it. Now, if you're in North Carolina, you go to your teacher working conditions survey, you go to the parent community involvement section, and that's it. If you're in South Carolina, you go to your Cogni Advanced Ed or your parent survey, according to what your district uses in South Carolina, and you pull that parent survey piece with communication with the school. Simple as that. I've got an example of each under skip, task, and prompts. I've got examples of what you would use. We're only looking for gaps in communication, period. And then list of participants, analysis of your findings, set of recommendations, identifies avenues of communication that will be established, and then a set of recommendations that include short-term, long-term objectives. All right, here's where we leave the road and hit the tree on the second problem. Folks don't understand the difference between short-term and long-term objectives. So let me stop and talk to you about that a minute. Short-term objectives should be communication-based, period. Hopefully using some kind of digital, something, internet, digital, social media, whatever. Your short-term goal would be, send out electronic parent newsletter, have a phone tree, but have an email tree or a text tree, or the whole notion of your short-term goal is to hook your parents, to start communicating with them. Now, doing it long-term is not a long-term goal. Long-term goal is something completely different in this case. The whole notion is we want to find gaps in communication, and then we want to have a plan, short-term goals, to start communicating better with parents so they'll know what's going on in school. We do that for the purpose of then having activities at our school that they know about and will come to for the purpose of help us help you help your child. Let me say that again. Help us help you help your child. We want a back bounce. We want an academic back, but we want to have family math night, family reading night, family EOG night, family EOC night, family college night. We want to have where we get parents into our building. Now that we're communicating with them, we're on their social media radar. They know that we're having something at school, and they come and we help them help their child. We give them information about colleges or scholarships. We talk to them about preparing their kids for state testing. We have family reading night where we give them materials that they can use, for lap time at home. We have family math night where we provide them manipulatives or games or strategies to help their kids at home. Short term is about communication. Long term is about activities at the school. So I should see in your long term, we're going to have family math night. We're going to have family reading night. We're going to have something like that. Your short-term goals are about communication. How are we going to communicate with these people better? I mean, snail mail don't work. I mean, when I was an elementary principal, we used to pin notes to the front shirt, the shirt of kindergarten kids when we sent them home. But we need a better system than that to get information home to parents. That was back before email. We didn't even have the internet back when I was first principal. Wasn't like we didn't use it, and most people didn't. Nobody had a cell phone. Wasn't such a thing as a cell phone. Most people didn't set it. They were at their job, so that you couldn't call them at home. If you called at home, nobody'd answer the phone. You don't have any of those barriers today. Parent communication ought to be easy today. I mean, you can't cuss. Have you ever seen? What adult do you know that don't carry a cell phone with them all the time and sleep with it next to their bed with the ringer on? I don't know anybody that doesn't have a cell phone with them every minute of every day, all the time. How are we going to communicate better with these people so that we, not just when the kid's in trouble, but so that they'll know the events that are going on. We keep them informed. We involve them in their child's education. That's short term. Long term is what activity how are we going to force multiply that communication that we got them? Now that they know what we're doing and we're communicating, let's get them to school and do something with them. Now, the best one I ever had was non-traditional, but it was the best one I've ever seen in terms of outcomes. It was at we got somebody here I know, Northwest Guilford High School, north and west of Greensboro. Nice suburban high school. Ralph Kitley was principal there. Ralph, personal friend of mine. Ralph's as tall as I am wide. Ralph's a 7-footer. Played at Duke. Played center for their basketball team. His daughter is the 6'6" center for Virginia Tech's women's basketball team that went to the Final Four. That's Ralph's daughter. And so Ralph was principal there, and I had 6 interns there at one time. And I loved working there. Knew Ralph. I mean, it's like old home week. Every time I went, they actually liked me. And so I hung out there a lot. And so I had 2 of my interns, actually 3, Diana Birdsey and Keisha Sinclair, and then one more help, but they were the 2. It was their brainchild. So what they did was this: they partnered with Novant. and they did a college fair in their gym. But they set aside a night to bring in parents of freshmen. What were you bringing freshmen to a college fair for? But on every table, Novant sponsored this. We had a big luncheon. I was the guest, and it was really nice. But on each table was, here's this job, anesthesiologist. What college do you need to go to? What graduate school, what college? But here's the thing. What courses do you need to take in high school to prepare for that? We did a communication exercise where we got them to come to the building. We got them in there. They saw these freshmen. Back then, you started your advanced course in the 10th grade and your APs in the 11th. I think you can do it quicker than that now. Within 2 years, Northwest Guilford High School had the most kids in advanced and AP classes, percentage-wise. They were number one in the state of North Carolina. They had the most. They had more than anybody else in the state in 2 years. They went from bottom quartile of kids in advanced and AP classes to the number one percentage-wise high school in the state, Northwest Guilford, in 2 years because of that. Now, if that didn't cause an academic bounce, oh my goodness, that's a force multiplier. But now I'm not telling you I was smart enough to figure that one out. But man, that lied, did it go well. Now, along about the same time, maybe a little before that one, sometime, over in Forsyth County in Winston-Salem. That was in Greensboro. In Winston-Salem, I had a group at Parkland High School, and they wanted to do something to communicate and get parents. Their population had changed, their pupil assignment, and they had large Hispanic population that came in. Dr. Lee was principal there at the time, and I had 4 interns. I had, Lisa Boer and Dr. Wendy and Jonathan and one more there. I had 4 there at the time. And so what we did there was we did this night where we were going to bring all the Hispanic families in. And we planned it out and, sent out messages and did all this kind of stuff. And so that night I showed up. I don't live that far from Winston, my regular house. We had 4 people to come. 4. A resounding disaster flop. We had 4 people to come. But we were paying attention. One of the 4 that came was Reverend Jose, who was the pastor over at the local church. And he sat down with us and we said, Reverend Jose, how'd this go this bad? He said, well, number one, you had it at the wrong time. What do you mean? He said, well, the buses stopped running late, so they could get here, but they won't have any way to get home. The buses don't run after 7. Uh-oh. He said, you need to move it up to 5 so they can get home. And you need to have it, And so we did all the things that he told us to do. Now, the second time we ran it, 4 again, except this time it was 400. We had 400 show up. That's not an estimate. We counted and got their names and addresses and personal information. And that school took off. Parkland took off, and the principal, he couldn't be more thankful. But the notion here is we had something for them when we got them there. We just didn't do a good job with the communication piece, but we didn't know. We had to kind of learn as we went on that one. And so the notion here is you got to get that communication piece first. That's what that short term is. It doesn't do any good to have the best event in the world if nobody shows up. You're all standing around looking at one another. Again, we had 4 people, not families, 4 people. We had 1 3-person family, mom and dad and kid and Reverend Jose is all we had at the first one. That was it. Second one, we killed it, 400. But we learned how to communicate and to understand our population. And so that's the whole notion here. Get that communication piece established, and then you can have some really good events, that will help. And the notion is help parents help their children. A lot of them don't know how, or they need help, or And this is a really good thing. So that's the whole notion. And then let me share my screen. Please don't forget there's a prompt too where you simply look at your teacher working conditions survey in North Carolina or your school survey in South Carolina, where you look at the school leadership piece and evaluate it right here. So again, you want to look at the parent and community involvement piece for this one to get your needs, your gaps in communication. And this one, you simply look at the strengths and weaknesses of school, not teacher leadership, but school leadership right here. And you make recommendations to the school improvement team. And then you simply identify your resources. What's it going to take? People and money wise. Identify your resources. And then you put your plan together, which is your action plan in 3, and then you write the other competencies in 4. Now, I've got examples of this is the graphic organizer you use for skip 2, where you do the specific activity, the timeline, person is responsible, resources needed, money, and people, and then you fill out the full one in 3. Let me remind you again, summative is how are we going to do fidelity checks to make sure it's happening, whatever we plan to happen, and then your goal is where you want to get to eventually. And then your indicator of success is, what would be a good, if we want to get to 400 parents coming, that's our goal, but we won't get 400 the first time. If we can get 50 the first time, you know how that works. But don't forget about, and our summative assessment method, how many parents show up, or, does it move our test scores, whatever. But again, formative is not about the kids it's about how are we going to make sure that this person right here implements what we said they were going to implement. It's a fidelity check of the people. Remember, that's what formative is in ours. And so it's really simple. It's as straightforward. It's as easy as I made it sound tonight. Where you can go wrong is thinking that the needs assessment, you want to get fancy. No, it's just gaps in communication. Just look at your TWC. And make sure you understand short-term is communication, long-term is an event at your campus where you get parents in, something academic. Not a ball game, not a talent show, but something academic. Family math night, family reading night, college fair night, something like that. So that's the notion. Now, let me quickly, to make sure I probably got it. And I'll just pull this one up because it's handy. In South Carolina, the same thing. All right, so let's see, district and school reports. We'll go to Alexander County Schools. All right. For the CAP, we're going to use time, facilities, resources. So right here is community support and involvement. This is what we're going to be looking for on our needs assessment. The school does a good job encouraging parent involvement, maintains clear two-way communication. Parents are in, see the questions here. This is all about communications. Parent and guardians know what's going on. Teachers provide parent guard useful information about student learning. Parents support teachers, contribute. This is, so you see what I'm talking about here? This is the one we would use for our gaps in communication. You could also do a little focus group if you wanted to, or you could do a survey if you want to do that. But right here is where you would start. And you can add anything you want. And again, now when you're evaluating school leadership for task 2, prompt 2 of task 1, this is the one right here, not this one. This is teacher leadership. You do this one. Okay? Everybody's got it. If you want to do something besides just looking at your TWC or your parent survey results, that's fine with me, but you don't have to. It's up to you. All right. Questions about the skip. It is very straightforward. Very straightforward. But your activities have to be centered around of your action plan about those short and long-term goals. What are we going to do to meet those things? What activity are we going to do to better communicate? That short-term goal is to communicate better to parents with a phone tree or an internet tree or use WhatsApp. Who's going to do it? How are they going to do it? How much money is it going to take? Those kinds of things. That's what we're looking for. All right. So we've looked at our previous work. We've looked at our weekly schedule. We've got case study 1, 2, case study 2 presentations next week. We've looked at our next evidence. Some of you are already moving to that. Last thing tonight, I don't have a lot on this. I've already talked about cyberbullying multiple times. I want to point out a couple things to you on that. I've got a link to North Carolina anti-bullying policies and cyberbullying right here. If you don't believe me, here's all the here it all is. That link is under tonight's lesson. Make sure you read through that. And I've got a couple of PowerPoints that we've done. Technology, and this one goes a little further than just cyber. This one goes into technology issues as well. It goes into what is bullying and harassing behavior, policy against, North Carolina general statutes, cyberbullying. Again, the latest case that we know about cyberbullying, the girl killed herself. The parents are suing now. That happened just days ago. And it's all about where it occurs. Some really good stuff. Here's the actual law. And so this is a really good primer on what it is, some preventative measures, the legal basis for your action that you take, because parents will say, you can't prove they did it at school. It has nothing to do with it. Or they didn't use a school device. Again, has nothing to do with it. So here's your legal foundation for taking action against kids who are doing this. All right, so that's a good one. And then the other one is this one. And this one has some really good scenarios in it, some videos. I like this one. So this one has some really good scenarios in it. If you want to work through these, and you can see examples. These are kind of practical, clinical examples of what we're talking about. That's what's in this one. You'll enjoy this one. But you can work through that. It takes a while. You can do it in 15 minutes, but it's a lot of fun to work through these. This one's at Lee County in North Carolina, down Sanford. And so here's one in Wake County. And here's one in Johnson County. Here's one in Harnett. I mean, these are not a million miles away. School bullying and victims, story and lawsuit. And so here's some cases that you can study on your own and learn a little bit about it. It's good. It's worth your time. Both of those. They're easy to get. Again, first one I just went through, take you 10 minutes. This one got some good stories in it and makes you think, and it's local home stuff. It's not a million miles away. So I've got those under that. So all of that is under, I can close some of these things now. Again, that's all under Zoom session 6. I've got, this is the bullying side. These are the two PowerPoints I just showed you. Antecedent behaviors, I've got that one again. And that's the last thing I'll remind you of tonight as we're coasting into our time here. The little things become the big things. You never know. Something you think is not a big deal, kid, commits suicide. Kid gets hurt, kid gets killed. You let stuff get out of control, kid brings a gun. I've had 2 interns who had a kid killed while they were interning, one at Albemarle High School, the other at Butler High School. The one at Albemarle, the kid walked up, the kid was standing next to him. He walked up and he thought he was going to shoot him, and he shot the kid next to him, killed him, and handed him the gun. He decided he didn't want to be a school administrator after that. He's a testing coordinator now. But it was a bullying situation that was not addressed and got out of control. And one kid, both of those were situations where a kid brought a gun and killed another kid because things got out of control. But again, the little things become the big things. Caroline, end us up tonight.
You wanted me to remind you that we did not need screenshots for task evaluations.
Yep. Don't have to do that. I can look in and see that. So you don't. That's an extra step you won't have to do going back in. Sometimes that's a little wonky and you have to wait. So I don't want to slow you down. So just keep rolling. I'm keeping up with the grading. I got 3 or 4 tonight, but I grade every day, every morning, every night. Or like today, I was in meetings this morning, so I graded a while this afternoon, and I'll grade again tonight. I like reading your work, all your work, your evidence work. I read every word of it. I read all of your posts. I try to, if I see something that catches my eye, of course, I take notes every week, all week on every piece of work that comes in. And so that's not to be boastful. That just, it matters. I'm not having you do this for busy work. This stuff matters. It gets you prepared. That second video, that PowerPoint showed you got some really good cases in it. It'll make you think. And some of you will recognize, we do dumb stuff like that at our school. You better quit it. And the last thing I'll leave you with, and Caroline and I have had this conversation, and I don't think she would mind me saying, sometimes you learn more when you don't have the best administrators. You learn what not to do, and that's what I provide those examples for. If you work with great people, that's wonderful because you learn a lot. But sometimes you don't learn what not to do. But if you work with people that don't know what they're doing, it helps you sometimes to see, boy, we shouldn't be doing that. Or you stop and think for a minute. We only doing that because we've always done that. Is that really a smart thing to do? We need to be intentional. We need to be reflective in our practice. I'm on the Standards Commission for principal preparation in North Carolina. My counterpart's the lady at Chapel Hill. I'm the private school representative. And that's one of the things that we're trying to build more into principal evaluation is more reflective practice. Thinking about, don't just do it because we've always done it. Be more reflective. Is that really a smart thing to do? And times change. Does that fit the time that we're in now that we would do something like that? I mean, stuff that was completely acceptable when I first started principaling when did I start principaling? 36 years ago? Yeah, be 37 this year. I started principaling 37 years ago this year. What we did back then, completely different than what we do now. We didn't even have state testing back then. We didn't, I was principal for what, 4 years before we ever started state testing. Yeah. So it's a different job. It's a different time. And it changes. And it changes every 2 or 3 years now because of technology and other things. The job changes. We need to be more reflective in our practice. Things were different after COVID than they were before and during. But times, because of the speed of technology, what used to take 10 years to change now takes 10 minutes. So we can't always anticipate what's going to happen next. That's why administrators have to be reflective, sit down and say, why are we doing that? Is that really worth the time or effort? Or is that really the best thing that we should do? And one of the things about working with people that don't know what they're doing or do it poorly is you can see that. It exemplifies it for you. So don't feel bad if your administrative team's not, if they aren't Manny, Mo, and Jack, Pep Boys crack team. They're more like them 3 monkeys that beat on that transmission in an Amoco commercial back in the 60s. Y'all don't know to remember it. but there was a commercial on TV back in the 60s for Amco transmission service, and they were showing their competitors, their qualified technicians. They had 3 monkeys with ball bats beating on a transmission. But that's illustrative sometimes that you have people who aren't any better than that. It's not a bad thing. All right. Questions you have for me before we end up tonight? I don't want to go too deep into our time here because next week will be a marathon. Randy, you got one? Go ahead.
It was just a quick question. Really, so I've been following, I guess, this whole strike thing up in Durham County Public Schools.
Yeah.
How, as
well, it's not really a strike. North Carolina is a right to work state. You can't actually unionize or strike. They're just doing what do they call them, workouts or walkouts or
right. Like they're like calling out now, like
they're calling in sick.
As administration, like, is there anything? Do you just is there anything you can even, or do you just try to stay out of it? Like, how does that work in terms of?
One of the things that you have to do, and it's up to you, is when job abandonment, when people don't come to work for 3 days in a row, you can actually terminate them, and that's up to you. You have to document that. So you better be, your district will give you guidelines on that, but you better be documenting who's there and who's not, and who's got doctor's notes and all that. I mean, just saying I'm not coming to work today is not good enough. 3 days in a row, if you don't have an excuse, I mean, you can, in North Carolina is a right to work state, you can be terminated after 3 days if you don't show up to work. But your district will give you the guidelines on that. But
is that even when they have sick days? Say someone that has 50 some sick days and they call
well, you can require a doctor's note even if it's sick days. Yeah, I mean, they got to prove that they're sick. That's what I'm talking about. You got to make sure you're doing your documentation. That, okay, you took a sick day, I want a doctor's note. If you didn't, then, we're going to count that day against you. Okay. I mean, you can't just say I'm sick and not have a doctor's note, urgent care or something if you're using sick days. Now, certified personnel cannot use annual leave days when school's in session. So they can't just say I'm taking a vacation day. No, either a sick day or personal day. And personal days, they only get two days. They only get 2 personal days. And they're supposed to give you a week's notice on those. Now, if it's like a death in the family or something, you wouldn't make it, they didn't know last week that Uncle George is going to die. You can't be unreasonable. But you only get 2 personal days. Now, when we're talking about salaried employees, they don't have even the same protections that teachers do. They've got sick days and that's about it. And if they don't have a doctor's note, yeah, you can turn them loose. But now here's the thing, Randy, is and you kind of have to temper this with how easy will they be to replace. But of course, if they're not coming to work, you might want to try it. I mean, but Durham will have to, trust me, they're having principals meeting where they're telling principals exactly what they want them to do or not do. This is not a discretion or you got to figure it out on your own kind of thing. Having worked in Charlotte long enough, when we would have issues like this, different schools, walkouts, those kinds of things, we had a plan in place, and we just say plan A, plan B, plan C. But you need to document who's not there and the reason that they're not there. That'd be your part, and your district will tell you what to do from there. What would I do to them? If I had to clean the bathrooms myself, I'd light them on fire. That'd just be me. Now, have they been done wrong? Absolutely, they've been done wrong. But in the end, they're going to hold them harmless for a little while. But we can't establish that we're going to let people choose when they're going to work or not going to work when we've got kids in the building. That's the scary part here. If you don't want to come and work, that's fine. We'll get somebody else to come and work. But we have to have, dealing with kids, the liability is just so great. And I truly have put on a hairnet back when I had hair. That was a long time ago. I didn't have as much as that picture on my screensaver there, but I had hair. And I put on a hairnet and served lunch. I mean, you got to feed kids. You got to bus them. You got to get them back and forth. You, in place of the parent, you're responsible for these kids. And you can't have people who just, this is a job and they show up when they want to or don't and try to get you over a barrel. They're not being, were they treated reasonably? No, but they're not, but two wrongs don't make a right is my point here. Let's see. Let me share my screen. Now, I didn't have this much hair down here, but that is my beard, by the way. I did grow it out that long when I did, what's that, Johnny Depp. That was me and my bride. That's been a few years back. But yeah, I drove a school bus. I drove the activity bus. I cleaned bathrooms. I had a female custodian when I was the elementary principal, and she couldn't deal with vomit. So I was the vomit man. Those big old yellow cans of vomit mix you used to have to put down. I mean, somebody has to take care of kids. I'm not telling you what a wonderful person I am, but the whole notion is somebody has to take care of these kids. And that's the part that scares me about these folks is they're acting like we're making furniture. No, these are children. We can't leave them unsupervised or not feed them or not clean up after them or let things get unsanitary or not drive them. I mean, they got to get to school. You know, this, if we don't think it's important, then nobody else will. And so if it was me, I'd light them up. But even if I had to do it myself, I'd still light them up and establish that, you know, this is precious cargo here. These children deserve the best we can do for them, especially in a place like Durham. They've been let down by the adults in their life, most of them all their life already. We don't need to continue to contribute to that cycle of poverty. We're supposed to be better than this in our business. We're supposed to look after these children. That's a great question, Randy. All right, I'll see y'all next week for the marathon. I'm looking forward to it, but this one usually goes faster than the first one. Everybody have a good week. Thank you. I appreciate you.